Bore da pawb. Hello everybody. Croeso. Welcome to my wild Welsh garden. My name's Isabel and I live here at the top of the Swansea Valley. I've been here for 6 years and I'm wilding my garden. So I'm trying to garden in a way that's more in keeping with a natural ecosystem and therefore better for wildlife. But I also want to show that a wildlife garden doesn't have to be an untidy mess that's just full of weeds and brambles. I want to show that you can have a garden where wildlife can find a home, but it's also somewhere beautiful that you and your family and your friends will want to spend time in. Well, this year in the UK has been the worst on record for insects. It's been called a butterfly emergency and a bee crisis by the wildlife organisations. And if this worries you as much as it worries me, then maybe you want to do something about it. And the thing is that me wilding my garden is not going to make the slightest bit of difference. But if everybody who had a garden just made it a bit better for wildlife, then together we could all make a big difference. And in the comments section of one of my last videos, I was asked by a viewer if I had any tips for somebody who was just starting out. She wanted to know what she could do now and over the winter to sort of prep her garden to be better for wildlife next year. And I thought, well, yeah, I have a lot of tips. So that's what this video is all about. What everybody can do now and over the winter to make their gardens better for wildlife next year. Because if everybody just did something, then maybe we could all collectively do something to avert this awful nature catastrophe that we're heading for. And now is the time for sort of taking stock of your flower beds and deciding if there's anything that you don't want. And if you're going to garden for wildlife, then you really don't want the plants that don't benefit wildlife at all. So this is an area that I was working on yesterday, and there was a peony there that is really not very good for wildlife, and it didn't even flower. So I've taken that out and I'm going to replace it with some more wildlife friendly plants. So which are the wildlife friendly plants? Well, we hear a lot about plants for pollinators, and these are the plants. In fact, there's a pollinator there. On the 2nd of November, it's a little common carder bumblebee. So the plants that are for pollinators are the ones that have these nice open flowers so that the insects can get to the organs that produce the pollen and nectar. The big blousy cultivars are no good because what's happened there is that they've been bred so that the parts of the plant that produce the pollen and nectar have sort of been turned into petals. So you get more petals, but not so good for wildlife. And sometimes the flowers are tiny, like here on this Verbena bonariensis. But they're still full of pollen and nectar. And one tiny little flower left on the buddleia. And just one Japanese anemone flower still flowering. As we're so well into autumn, there's not so many flowers still flowering in the garden, but there's still some roses. So if you're going to plant a rose, choose one like this with a nice open flower, and that's the part of the flower that produces the pollen and the nectar. And then if you can, choose a rose with lovely open flowers for the insects in the summer, and then these magnificent hips, which is food for the birds in the winter. And the flowers that I've just been showing you are all cultivars, they're non-natives, but have native plants as well if you can. This is a native foxglove, which of course shouldn't be flowering at this time of year in the UK, but for some reason it is. And this is an evening primrose, which is still flowering. And then it produces all these lovely seed heads for the birds to eat in the winter. So I've always seen this as a weed, and I've always weeded it out, but this year I've left them, and yes, there's always been an insect on the flowers. And so there's another couple there that have germinated, which will flower next year. And there's also foxgloves. All this is self-seeded. And some ragwort, which is considered quite a harmful weed, but it's fine to have in your garden, and it's just fabulous for wildlife. And the thing about native plants is that they're usually the larval food plant of our native insects. So if you have plants for pollinators, you're helping the adults, and if you have native plants and you allow them to be eaten by caterpillars, then you're helping the whole of the life cycle of insects. And that's what's needed, really, not just to feed the adults, but to feed the caterpillars as well. So autumn is a really good time to be taking stock, and maybe, if you've got enough money, to buy some really good plants for pollinators, and also thinking about just allowing some native plants to come and live in your garden, because they don't cost any money. A really good way of attracting birds into your garden is to plant trees, because they do love to have somewhere to perch. And if you're going to plant a tree, winter is the time to do it. You can plant a tree any time of the year, but they're more expensive if you buy them in a pot. And in the winter, you can buy them bare rooted, and they're considerably cheaper. So if you want trees for wildlife, as well as birds to perch in, then choose trees that have flowers in the spring and then berries in the winter. Flowers for the insects and berries for the birds. This is a rowan. It's not a native one, it's a cultivar, but it has these lovely yellow berries. The best trees you can plant for wildlife are native trees. Now these two little trees here in pots are alder buckthorn, and the caterpillars of the yellow brimstone butterfly feed on these. They also have flowers in the spring and berries in the autumn. This bigger one I bought in September, and when I bought it, it was covered in leaves, and it does turn a lovely sort of yellowy orange colour in the autumn. They've all gone now, and the berries have all gone. It was covered in berries, and the berries have all gone. So the birds have eaten them all. It might have something to do with the fact that it's right next to the bird table. So they're both in pots. The one on the left is because I'm trying to decide what to do with it. The one on the right was because it was very small when I bought it. So yeah, that's the job for the winter, is to plant these somewhere. Winter is also the time for planting a native hedge if you've got a suitable boundary and some room, because at this time of the year you can buy the little hedging plants bare root, and they're a lot less expensive. All along the back wall of my garden here, I've planted a native hedge. Now originally I was going to keep it nice and neat and tidy, and there was an access path along the hedge, so I could do just that. But then I decided I would let it grow a little bit wild. And the thing about all the shrubs and trees in here is that they're all either sort of larval food plants for our native insects, or they produce berries for the birds. And there's a lot of sparrows in there at the moment. Yes, it also provides sort of perching places and hiding places for the little birds. And hopefully, as it gets thicker, opportunities for nesting sites as well. They do say that the best thing that you can do for wildlife is to dig a pond. Well, that's what I've done here. I built this pond the first winter I arrived, so it's coming up to its 6th year. I used to say that I never saw any wildlife, and really that's because I didn't look. I had frogs in it this year, and there's newts living here, and all manner of dragonflies and damselfly larvae, beetles, water boatmen, pond skaters, and the birds come and drink out of it, and yeah, lots of wildlife. The thing is that buying new plants for pollinators costs money, planting trees costs money, and making a wildlife pond costs money. So yeah, some things do cost some money, but other things don't cost anything at all, like allowing weeds or native wild plants come into your garden. That doesn't cost anything at all. Allowing your hedges to become untidy and thick, that doesn't cost anything. And have a go at allowing your climbers to become a little bit untidy and unruly. There's two here. There's a rambling rose called Rambling Rosie, and then there's a sort of shrubby honeysuckle. I'm afraid I don't know what it is. I bought it at a car boot sale for £1.50, I think it was. And but it's red and white, and I've let the top grow like this, and yeah, I've had 30 sparrows hiding in there, and really encourages birds into the garden. And Rambling Rosie is still flowering. So another thing that you can do is not be too tidy in your flower beds. Autumn is traditionally the time for sort of tidying things up. But all these dead plants and things that have fallen over all provide really important habitat for invertebrates over the winter. And the invertebrates are the bottom of the food chain. So that's what the animals like the birds and the amphibians and reptiles eat. So if you have invertebrates in your garden, then you're more likely to get the larger animals. And I do have to say that this is one of the things that I've really struggled with, because I'm a conventional gardener. I'm nearly 70. I was brought up in the days of Percy Thrower, Alan Titchmarsh, where you have a nice tidy garden. And I've struggled with the whole messy aspect, but I think I'm actually getting to like it much better now. And the stems of dead plants are places where little creatures can burrow into and spend the winter. They can hibernate in them. So it's really important to leave as many of the dead stems in your garden as you can. And if they do fall over, like here, and it begins to look a bit on the too untidy side, you can cut them off and hang them somewhere, like I've done here in an old little dead tree. Then you've still got the habitat, it's just been moved to a different place. And you can make quite a feature of it in your garden. And if you really don't like the way that these dead stems sort of fall over and flop over and make the place look untidy, you can make yourself a bug snug, which is basically some upright poles or branches. I've got 4 here, but you can have 3 or 5. These are made from buddleia, but if you want something a bit more permanent, then use something like hazel. And this looks really quite rustic, so if you want something a bit sort of sleeker, a bit more clean lined, then you could use bamboo canes. And I guess you could, if you wanted something to look a bit more elegant, you could use one of those lovely plant supports that you buy in the garden centres. But basically you just want some uprights that are going to keep a bunch of old dead plants in place for the winter. Yeah. And because they're hollow, the little creatures can crawl in there if they want. And I'm just going to add to this as the winter goes on. And the thing is that if you remove the stems during the winter and put them on the compost, then anything that's found a home in there is not going to survive very long because the stems are going to rot down. Whereas here, they'll stay, relatively dry and should make it through the winter, and so should their inhabitants. I've made this on the edge of one of the veg patches, and I've left these rather bedraggled looking nasturtiums around the edge because, amazingly, there's still a bee visiting the flowers. And another thing on the same theme of not being so tidy is to leave the leaves. In fact, I think that's a thing, isn't it, on social media? Leave the leaves. Yes, a lot of conventional gardeners spend a lot of time in the autumn raking leaves up. And they do, good things with them, like making potting compost and that sort of thing. But if you leave them on the ground, again, it's the same story. They provide valuable habitat for invertebrates over the winter. And if you have more invertebrates in your garden, you're going to have more of the bigger animals as well. But one place it's maybe not advisable to leave the leaves, and that's in the pond. So I've had a go at clearing the leaves out of there. But given the number of leaves that are still on this cherry tree, I think I might have to do that a few more times yet this autumn. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about in this video is to have areas of long grass in your garden if you've got the space. The Butterfly Conservation Charity have shown that the gardens with the most butterflies are those that have areas of long grass. This is because so many of our native butterflies, their larvae actually feed on grasses. And it's a really good habitat for little creatures like lizards and frogs and toads and newts to hide in. This is an area that I only sowed in the spring around the new pond. And if you have an area of lawn, now's the time to be sort of thinking about, can you leave some of it long over the summer? Most of us, I think, now have heard of No-Mow May, where you leave your lawn during May for all the wildflowers in it to flower for the pollinators. But now there's Let It Bloom June and No-Mow Summer. I hope you can see there that there's lots of wildflowers. And in the summer, I let this all grow long and it was just lovely. I have made several videos actually about my agonising as to what to do with this lawn. So if you're interested, you could have a look. So there you have it, just a few things that you can do now and over the winter that will make your garden much better for wildlife next year. So if you're a conventional gardener and you're thinking about it, or if you've just got a new garden and you're trying to decide what to do with it, then go for it. Please become a wildlife gardener, wild your garden and make your garden better for wildlife. You will never be bored because there's always something new to see and something new to learn about. And your life will be enriched by sharing your space with these wild creatures. So Thank you for joining me in my wild Welsh garden. Thank you for watching the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Hwyl fawr.